Hello everyone, and welcome to another session of our Pro-Revenge. In today's story, picture this: your estranged, entitled parents reappear at your workplace after a decade, not to seek forgiveness, but to demand a $200,000 success fee for having raised you. Their claim was that they hardened me by making me homeless, and in return, I gave them a real lesson in what toughness truly means. Our first entitled parents pro-revenge story from Reddit is called, "My parents left me at my absolute lowest. Now that I've succeeded, they are demanding $200,000 for raising me. I was consistently seen as the problem child, not due to any rebellious or malicious behavior, but because a learning disability caused me to struggle academically, while my younger sister effortlessly achieved straight A's. Within a family fixated on public perception and scholarly success, I was the source of embarrassment they preferred to conceal. My parents never voiced it explicitly, but I was aware. I could see it in the way they'd steer conversations away when friends inquired about me, or how their faces would illuminate when discussing my sister's scholarships, yet they'd skim over my applications to technical college. They would introduce her as our daughter, the honor student, whereas I was simply their other child. By the time I was 19, I had accepted my role as the family's black sheep. What I hadn't anticipated was that they would literally cast me out. I arrived home one afternoon from my job at a furniture warehouse to find the majority of our possessions gone. The apartment we had occupied for years was almost bare, with only my bedroom furniture and a few of my boxes piled near the door. On the kitchen counter was an envelope bearing my name. Inside, I found a brief note along with enough money for a single month's rent. The message stated that they had covered the rent until the end of the month, were relocating for a superior opportunity, and that I was now old enough to manage on my own. They had moved to a gated community situated 3 hours away, the type of neighborhood featuring a golf course and stringent HOA regulations, embodying the lifestyle they had always coveted. My sister, who had recently enrolled in university, would live with them during her academic breaks. They left no forwarding address, only a phone number that I tried calling once, which led straight to voicemail. I left a message asking for guidance on what to do next, but they never returned my call. I won't pretend I managed the situation gracefully from the start. I spent that initial month in a daze, going to work and returning to that sparsely furnished apartment, subsisting on instant noodles to make every dollar last. The silence within those walls was overpowering. I was accustomed to the constant sounds of my family, my sister's music, my parents' disputes, and now it was just myself and the sound of my own footsteps echoing on the bare floors. Still, I tried to maintain a positive outlook, assuring myself it was a temporary situation and I would devise a plan. However, once the month concluded, reality struck with force. My salary from the warehouse was insufficient to renew the lease. The numbers simply didn't add up. The landlord showed some sympathy, but not enough to allow me to stay without payment. He had his own expenses to cover. I ended up crashing on a co-worker's sofa for a period, and then, when that living situation ended, I resorted to sleeping in my dilapidated car. Those initial weeks in my car were unforgiving. The summer heat made it nearly impossible to rest during the daytime. I would relocate to different parking lots nightly, attempting to avoid arousing suspicion, perpetually anxious about being bothered by security or the police. I showered at a local gym whenever I could scrape together enough for a day pass, brushed my teeth in gas station restrooms, and changed into my work attire in public bathrooms, trying to appear like a typical customer. The most challenging aspect wasn't the physical hardship, it was the ceaseless effort to conceal my circumstances. I would arrive at work and act as though everything was normal, inventing reasons why I couldn't join co-workers after hours. Constantly afraid that someone might discover I was homeless. The shame associated with it was more profound than the actual adversity. It felt as if I had validated all of my parents' beliefs about me, that I was incapable of navigating life independently and was the family's failure. What ultimately rescued me was being hired by a construction crew. Their wages were better than at the warehouse, and crucially, the site supervisor was unconcerned with my formal education. He valued my punctuality, my ability to follow directions, and my willingness to engage in hard labor. I was a quick learner, kept my head down, and soaked up every piece of knowledge I could about the industry. Construction here in South America operates differently than it does up north. It's more informal in certain respects but relies on the same core principles. I mastered concrete work, framing, and fundamental electrical skills. My days were spent under the sun, my body grew stronger, and my bank account began to grow, albeit slowly and arduously. The men on the crew became my true family. When they learned I was living out of my car, one of them, an older man named Hugo, offered me a room in his home for a modest rent. It wasn't luxurious, essentially a converted storage space, but it had a bed and a door that locked. I nearly broke down in tears the day I moved in. I worked in construction for 3 years, advancing from a general laborer to an assistant foreman. While my old classmates were sharing photos from nightclubs and vacations, I was learning to interpret blueprints and estimate material costs. I maintained a notebook where I meticulously recorded every peso spent and every peso saved. Watching those numbers gradually increase became an obsession. The crew taught me more than just the technical skills of construction. They instilled in me a sense of pride in one's work, the importance of showing up even when exhausted, and the deep satisfaction that comes from creating something with your own hands. Hugo, in particular, became the father figure I never had. He provided honest critiques of my work, celebrated my achievements, and offered guidance on saving money and planning for what lay ahead. When I eventually moved from his storage room into a place of my own, he helped me transport my meager possessions and shared a six-pack with me to mark the occasion. A significant turning point occurred when the company I was with undertook a renovation project for a real estate investor. This exposed me to the business aspect of the industry. I observed how he acquired a dilapidated property for a minimal price, refurbished it inexpensively using teams like ours, and then sold it for a substantial profit or leased it out. The figures captivated me. He had invested approximately $30,000 in renovations and then sold the property for $90,000. That $60,000 profit replayed in my mind constantly. I began to delve into real estate during my free time, consuming every book I could find, watching instructional videos, and enrolling in free online courses. I educated myself on property valuation, market fluctuations, mortgage financing, and landlord-tenant laws. The local library became my second home. By the way, everyone, let me know in the comments if you still visit libraries. I have to admit, I don't go much these days, as I'm not even certain they are common in Thailand, at least in my area. But in the past, I truly enjoyed visiting libraries and discovering new books. While you're at it, please remember to like the video and leave some star emojis in the comments to show your support. Thank you very much. Anyway, I would spend countless hours there after my workday, poring over books on property investment, analyzing successful developers, and learning about zoning laws and tax implications. It turned into a fixation. The investor took note of my keen interest and began to share his strategies, demonstrating how he assessed properties and teaching me to identify promising opportunities. His motives weren't entirely altruistic, he needed dependable contractors. Nevertheless, I gained more practical knowledge from him in 6 months than I would have in years of formal business education. After several years, I had saved enough to purchase my first property. It was nothing glamorous, a small apartment in a less than desirable neighborhood that required extensive repairs. The bank considered my investment in that area to be reckless, but I perceived potential that others overlooked. The neighborhood was on the cusp of gentrification, and I knew property values would eventually climb. I arranged with my boss to acquire company materials at cost and performed most of the renovation work myself during weekends. It took many months of grueling, long days, but upon completion, I was able to rent it out for 3 times the amount of my mortgage payment. That initial property provided lessons that no textbook could. I had to deal with a tenant who wrecked the apartment and then vanished without settling his dues, which taught me the importance of thorough tenant screening. I had to replace pipes that burst in the dead of winter, which erased 2 months of my profits. I came to understand that being a landlord means being available 24/7 to handle emergencies at 3 in the morning. However, the rental income, even after deducting expenses, was a game changer. It was money I didn't have to work for directly, income that accrued while I was asleep or at my other jobs. That's when I had my breakthrough. This was the path forward. Months later, I acquired another property, and then one more, and began contracting crews to handle the renovations instead of doing it all myself. Every peso of profit was reinvested into acquiring more properties. My approach was straightforward: purchase in up-and-coming areas before the prices soared, renovate cost-effectively, rent at the current market rate, save the profits, and do it all over again. Before long, I had a small portfolio of rental units that provided a consistent income. The transition from a small-scale landlord to a legitimate developer occurred when I purchased my first parcel of undeveloped land. It was a significant risk, requiring every dollar I had plus a substantial loan, but I recognized its potential. The area was expanding, with new businesses moving in and infrastructure being upgraded. I constructed a small apartment building, with just 6 units, personally overseeing every aspect of the construction. When all 6 units were rented out within a month of being finished, I knew I had discovered my calling. By the age of 27, I had transitioned from buying and renovating to developing. I acquired land, built small apartment complexes, and filled them with tenants. The business I had started as a side project became my full-time endeavor. I hired a property manager, then an entire team of them, and branched out into commercial real estate, constructing small retail centers and office buildings. I won't claim it was a smooth ride or that I was immune to errors. I overpaid for properties, was taken advantage of by unreliable contractors, managed difficult tenants, and came close to bankruptcy on 2 occasions. Yet, I learned from each setback, adapted my approach, and continued to press onward. By the time I turned 30, I was genuinely affluent. Not in a showy way, I still drove a practical truck and resided in a modest apartment. But my company held properties in 2 cities, with a total value in the millions. I had employees, accountants, and lawyers on retainer. The 19-year-old who couldn't make rent was now a real estate developer presiding over a burgeoning empire. I never made any attempt to get in touch with my parents again. Frankly, why would I? They had made their position abundantly clear. I did think of them from time to time, wondering if they ever felt a pang of regret for abandoning me, but for the most part, I was too engrossed in constructing my life to linger on the past. Then, one afternoon, my secretary informed me that I had visitors at the office who identified themselves as my parents. My initial impulse was to have her turn them away, but my curiosity won out. I hadn't laid eyes on them in more than a decade. What could they possibly be after? They appeared older, my father's hair had turned gray, and my mother had gained some weight. They were well dressed. However, in expensive attire and jewelry, projecting an air of affluence. They took seats across from my desk in my office, their gazes sweeping the room with ill-disguised astonishment. We engaged in some stilted pleasantries for about 30 seconds before my father got straight to the point. Apparently, they had learned through common acquaintances that I had become quite successful. He claimed they were proud of me, though his eyes failed to meet mine as he said it. They expressed a desire to reconnect and be a family once more. I inquired about my sister. She had completed her degree, married, and was living her own life. They maintained regular contact with her. I then asked why they had chosen to reach out now, after such a long time. My mother's eyes welled with tears. She explained that they had made errors, that abandoning me was the most difficult choice they had ever faced, and that they believed I needed to cultivate independence. What an incredible justification for deserting your child. She added that my success had vindicated their decision. It was all a fabrication, and we were all aware of it, but I allowed them to speak. Then, my father revealed the true purpose of their visit. He stated that they had invested a great deal in my upbringing, food, housing, and education for 19 years. Now that I had achieved significant success, it was only just that I repay them for that investment. They had determined a success fee of $200,000. I've converted the amount from pesos to give you a sense of what they were asking for. At that, I simply laughed. I couldn't restrain myself. The sheer nerve of showing up after having abandoned me, feigning that it was for my benefit, and then demanding a 6-figure sum was so preposterous it was almost commendable. My father's face flushed with anger. He began to argue that I wouldn't possess the work ethic to succeed if they hadn't been firm with me, and that I owed them everything. My mother joined in, speaking of the sacrifices they had made and how much they had given up to raise me. I let them conclude their prepared speeches. Then, I instructed them to get the hell out of my office. They did not react favorably. My father started shouting about my ingratitude and how I had always been a challenging child. My mother's crying intensified as she claimed they had anticipated this reaction, that I had always been self-centered. At that point, security escorted them from the premises. 2 days later, I received a communication from my corporate office. An anonymous caller had alleged that I was defrauding clients, conducting illicit operations, and had founded my business with stolen funds. The claims were groundless and patently untrue, but they generated enough of a disturbance that I had to spend hours on the phone with lawyers and accountants to verify that everything was legitimate. I knew instantly that my parents were behind it. The timing was too coincidental. They called again a week later, this time from a different number, with my mother taking the lead. Karma, she said. She proposed that if I simply gave them their due, they would cease to bother me. If not, they would continue to create difficulties. They claimed to know influential people and have connections that could complicate my life. I told them I would consider it and then ended the call. I wasn't contemplating paying them, I was strategizing on how to bring this to a definitive end. That's when I began to investigate their lives. I engaged a private investigator, nothing elaborate, just someone to review public records and social media. The findings were quite revealing. My parents were financially ruined. Not just facing hardship, but completely submerged in debt. They had purchased a home in that upscale gated community, far beyond their means, to maintain a certain image. The property boasted a pool and a 3-car garage, and they were members of the local country club. My father's business had collapsed years earlier. My mother was unemployed. They had been surviving on credit cards and loans, repeatedly refinancing their home, and accumulating new debt to service old obligations. The investigators' report presented a stark reality. They were on the brink of financial collapse. Their credit cards were maxed out, they had personal loans from various lenders, and they even owed money to friends of the family. They had masterfully maintained their facade, continuing to post vacation pictures on social media, attend country club functions, and drive luxury vehicles. But it was all financed by debt, a complete illusion. The bank was on the verge of foreclosing on their home. They were 3 months delinquent on their mortgage payments and were facing eviction from their idyllic neighborhood. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. They had forsaken me to pursue this very lifestyle, and now that lifestyle was crumbling around them. This was the reason for their visit. Not because they had experienced a sudden surge of parental affection, and not because they genuinely wished to reconnect. They were in a desperate situation, and I represented their final chance for a financial rescue. The person I used to be might have felt a glimmer of pity. By the way, everyone, let me know in the comments if you would have felt any compassion for these parents. How would you have handled this scenario? Would you have intervened before their lives completely unraveled and they potentially lost their home? Share your thoughts in the comments. However, the person who had once slept in his car and used gas station bathrooms for hygiene felt only a cold, strategic resolve. I now had resources, connections, and money. I could either assist them or pursue an entirely different course of action. I had my legal team contact their bank. I expressed an interest in acquiring defaulted mortgages in bulk, stating that we were looking to expand our portfolio. The bank was eager to sell, wanting to remove these problematic loans from their records. I purchased my parents' mortgage debt for 60 cents on the dollar. The bank was indifferent to the buyer's identity, they simply wanted the debt off their hands. The transaction was processed through a subsidiary of my company, with no direct link to me. And just like that, I became the owner of their debt. I was now their creditor. I made no contact with them, I simply bided my time. According to the records, they were now for months in arrears. Foreclosure proceedings had already been initiated, but I deliberately slowed the process down, instructing my lawyers to file for extensions and prolong the matter. I wanted to give them ample time to feel the pressure. They called me again from the same number. My father's tone was different this time, less confrontational, more pleading. He admitted they had been overly aggressive before and now just wanted to find a solution. He asked if I could lend them some money to help them through a difficult period. I replied that I would think about it. Time continued to pass. They were now 5 months behind on their payments. My lawyer dispatched foreclosure notices to them, a standard procedure, under the name of the subsidiary company, which they wouldn't recognize. My dad called once more, this time in a state of panic. He said their bank had sold their mortgage to some investment firm and they were about to lose their house. He asked if I knew any real estate investors who could offer assistance, or if I could put in a good word for them. I told him I would see what I could do. The foreclosure moved forward as planned. My lawyers were thorough, and everything was handled according to the law. The local court approved the foreclosure without any complications. These things are routine. My parents were given 30 days to vacate the property. That's when they made their final call. My mom was sobbing, almost unintelligible. They were losing everything, she said. The bank, no, the investment company that now held their mortgage, was evicting them. They had nowhere else to turn. All their savings, their retirement funds, everything was invested in that house. She pleaded with me for a loan of $200,000, the very amount they had previously demanded. But this time, they were begging for it. They would repay me, she vowed, they just needed help. I inquired about their moving plans. She mentioned they had found a cheap apartment with a month-to-month lease in a rough part of town. It was all they could afford. She provided me with the address. I recognized it instantly. It was located in the same apartment complex where they had abandoned me all those years ago. The building had deteriorated since then, becoming more rundown, with lower rents. I was aware of this because I had purchased the entire complex 2 years prior as an investment property. It was now part of my portfolio. I let a long pause hang in the air, then I informed them that I was unable to help. My mom began to cry even more intensely. My dad took the phone and resumed shouting, saying I owed them, that they had raised me, and that I was abandoning them just as they had. He caught himself mid-sentence, realizing what he was about to say. I completed the thought for him, just as they had abandoned me. The line fell silent. I could hear my mom's sobs in the background and my dad's labored breathing. I then revealed that the investment company that had acquired their mortgage was mine. The apartment complex they were relocating to was also mine. Each month they paid rent, assuming they could afford it, the money would be coming to me. I now owned them in the same manner they believed they owned me when they demanded their success fee. My dad called me a name I won't repeat. He accused me of being cruel and vindictive, claiming I had orchestrated this entire situation. He said I had become just like them, perhaps even worse. He wasn't entirely incorrect about the planning aspect. I had meticulously engineered this from the moment I learned of their financial predicament. I had identified the opportunity. It was a methodical, calculated move, precisely the kind of business strategy they would likely admire if it were directed at someone else. I told them they had imparted a valuable lesson to me when I was 19, that family ties are meaningless when finances are at stake. That in difficult times, you must prioritize your own survival and let the vulnerable fend for themselves. They had, as they claimed, made me tough. Now, they were getting to see what that toughness looked like from the receiving end. My mom got back on the phone, pleading once more, saying they were sorry, that they had made mistakes, and that they loved me. But I didn't buy it. Love doesn't leave you in a half-empty apartment with only 1 month's rent and a brief note. Love doesn't demand payment for the basic responsibilities of parenting. Love doesn't resort to threatening your livelihood when you refuse to comply. I informed them that their rent was due on the 1st of the month, just like all my other tenants. If they were late, I would evict them in accordance with proper legal procedures. I would afford them the same level of consideration as anyone else, no more, no less. They moved into that apartment complex the following week. I didn't visit them, there was no need. My property manager forwarded me the signed lease agreement and the first month's rent payment. They paid on time for the first 3 months, but then they were late. Soon after, they missed a payment altogether. My property manager adhered to protocol, sending out the required notices and initiating eviction proceedings. I could have intervened. Yes, I could have instructed my manager to grant them another opportunity, but I chose not to. They called one last time before the eviction was finalized. My dad said they had learned their lesson and that I had made my point. He admitted defeat and asked if we could please work something out. But I simply told him that he was old enough to figure it out on his own. Then I hung up. The eviction proceeded as scheduled. The last I heard, they had moved in with my sister, who was reportedly not happy about the arrangement but felt a sense of duty. She called me once, furious, accusing me of being heartless for what I had done to our parents. I reminded her that she had no issue maintaining a relationship with them while they acted as if I didn't exist, and that she had enjoyed their support while I was homeless. I also pointed out that she could have reached out to me at any point over the last 10 years but had chosen not to. She didn't have much to say in response to that. So, guys, let me know in the comments if you think the original poster was the a-hole in this story or if he did the right thing. I appreciate your opinions. And now, let's look at some perspectives from Reddit. The first comment offered this take: "You're the a-hole. And frankly, you've become the very thing you despised about them. Look, what your parents did was undeniably horrendous. Abandoning you at 19 was cruel, and showing up to demand money was delusional. I'm not defending them in any way. But dude, you didn't just decline to help them. You orchestrated their total financial ruin like some sort of cartoon villain. You deliberately purchased their debt, delayed the foreclosure to make them suffer, and then positioned yourself as their landlord to exert control. That's not justice, it's sadistic. You could have simply said no and continued with your life. Instead, you invested time, money, and effort to ensure they experienced maximum suffering. The fact that you admitted to engineering the whole thing demonstrates this was never about self-preservation. It was about revenge. You wanted them to feel what you felt, and you had the means to make it happen, so you did. And now they are homeless again, living with your sister, who did nothing to you. You've now involved her in this mess. Your parents were terrible, yes, but that doesn't give you a license to be terrible in return. You transformed into the same cold, calculating individual who prioritizes money over people. Congratulations, I suppose. You had every right to refuse them. You had every right to cut off all contact forever. But you did not have the right to systematically ruin them just because you were able to. That isn't strength or justice, it's cruelty executed with a business plan. The most tragic part is that you clearly haven't recovered from what they did. A healed person would have turned them away and put them out of their mind. Instead, you're still so consumed by the past that you devoted months to making them suffer. They still have control over you, just in a different form. Your success should have been the ultimate revenge. Instead, you've shown that deep down, you're still that wounded 19-year-old, just with more wealth and power to cause pain. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, not even in the slightest. Everyone in the comments claiming you went too far is overlooking what they actually did to you. They didn't just make a mistake. They literally abandoned their 19-year-old son, left him to be homeless, and then ghosted him for a decade. Do you realize how many nights he could have died sleeping in that car? How close he came to completely giving up? They didn't care. And they didn't return because they missed him or felt guilty. They came back because they wanted money, and they calculated a success fee as if he were some kind of investment. When he refused, they tried to sabotage his business with false claims. These are not parents. They are opportunistic strangers who happen to share his DNA. Furthermore, you didn't orchestrate their destruction as someone else claimed. They destroyed themselves through their own poor financial choices and came to you expecting a bailout. All you did was conduct business. You purchased distressed debt, which is perfectly legal, and you enforced lease agreements, which is standard practice. If they had been tenants of any other landlord, the outcome would have been identical. People are calling you cruel for buying their debt, but let's be realistic. If you hadn't bought it, someone else would have, and that person would not have allowed them 3 months of timely payments before initiating eviction. You actually gave them more opportunities than a random investor would have. Their imagined crowd needs to truly imagine what it's like to be 19, homeless, and abandoned by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. Then, imagine those same people reappearing when you finally made something of yourself, not to apologize, but to demand money and threaten you when you say no. Also, your sister is upset. Where was she for 10 years? She maintained a relationship with them while you were struggling and never once contacted you. She benefited from their support while you received nothing. She has no right to judge you now. You owe them nothing. Not money, not mercy, not a second chance. They made their decisions, and now they are facing the consequences. That's not revenge, that's just life. The next story is a more light-hearted tale of petty revenge, but it's definitely worth a listen, so don't switch off the video just yet. It begins like this. I was residing in an apartment with a neighbor to my right and another one above me. Both neighbors had children who were very loud during the day and at night. I didn't mind the daytime noise much, they were kids, and that's understandable. But seriously, who runs around and screams until 3 a.m.? On several occasions, I posted in our building's WhatsApp group, politely requesting that they keep their children quiet at night, as I and others needed to sleep for an early start. I either received no response, or the parents would say they'd talk to their kids but couldn't guarantee anything. Fast forward to my birthday. A friend gifted me a fantastic soundbar, and upon getting home, I was eager to test it out with some music. It was around midnight, and I genuinely wasn't thinking about revenge or anything similar. I just wanted to try my new gadget and didn't realize how late it was. I put on my rock playlist at a high volume while trying to learn its features on my PC. At about 2:30 a.m., the upstairs neighbor came and knocked on my door. It was only then, before answering, that I noticed the time. I opened the door to see him, ready to ask me to lower the volume. Before he could even start, I apologized, explaining I hadn't noticed the time, and immediately turned it off. I didn't bring up his kids or anything. He expressed his appreciation and left. From that day forward, neither of those two neighbors' kids made any noise at night. Not a single time. It was as if their parents had always been able to keep them quiet but didn't see the need until they experienced how other neighbors could also create midnight disturbances. If only I had known this sooner, I would have purchased that soundbar a long time ago. And the final one is a brilliant petty revenge story titled, X Wouldn't Pay Me Back, so I made her pay via the bell bill. This happened a few years ago now, but I still find it amusing to recall. Not sure if it fits here. We began dating at 15 and moved in together at 18. Within 6 months of cohabiting, she cheated on me. She owed me around $800 for a month's rent and a vet bill I had covered. We continued to live together for 6 months after our breakup because, even though I could have moved back home, she insisted I move out while also continuing to pay my share of the rent. The situation was unpleasant, but it was less unpleasant than financing her own private place. The TV and internet bill was in her name. We had cable, and the debt she owed me was documented through email. I strategically sent numerous emails asking her to confirm her awareness of the money owed and the specific amount. I also proposed that we could simply subtract my portion of the cable bill from her debt to me. In the second to last month of our lease, she was relentlessly pestering me for my share of the internet cable bill, about $30. She wouldn't accept no for an answer and threatened to withhold payment, which would result in it being shut off. We had another roommate in school who needed the internet, so I paid my part. By this point, she was frequently staying with the man she cheated on me with, so she was rarely around. For some reason, when she moved all her belongings out, she left the cable box and Wi-Fi router behind. I suppose she assumed I was still paying for and using the service. I had brought my own TV to use after her new boyfriend came one day and took hers without a word while I was in the middle of watching it with a Tinder date. That was a strange evening. To be clearer, it was her TV they came to take. I brought in my own television after they collected hers. It was just awkward that I was actively using her TV when they arrived to retrieve it. Anyway, I knew I was never going to see my money again. Which gave me an idea. I decided to order every channel available, all the extras I could get with just a 4-digit PIN. Before doing this, I emailed her one last time, writing something like, "Just to confirm, my share of this month's bill will be deducted from the X amount you owe me." Correct. She agreed. These purchases started a week or two before I moved back in with my parents. I bought every channel individually, purchased and rented movies, and even started ordering pay-per-view adult content because I found the idea hilarious. I kept a record of everything I bought, driving the bill up to almost the exact amount she owed me, leaving a small margin for error, but it came to about $750. When she received the bill, I was already back at my parents' house. She showed up at their home, bill in hand. My father answered the door. She meekly said something along the lines of, "He spent so much on this bill, I can't afford it." To which my father replied, "Use the money you owe him to pay for it," and closed the door in her face. I was listening from out of sight. I'll never know if she ended up having to pay it, but it felt satisfying to do at the time. A fun detail, they got engaged after just 2 or 3 months and are still engaged to this day, 4.5 years later. They haven't married, and she is pregnant with his child. Edit, in 2024, they broke up. She just had his baby and is now a single mother to the child she conceived with the man she cheated on me with. Not sure who initiated the breakup, but that's quite amusing. Another edit, they broke up because she walked in on him cheating on her in their bed. I think he left her for the other woman, but then the other woman dumped him, and he begged for her to take him back, which she did. Oh my God, what a disaster. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and I will see you again.